I will start in 3, 2, 1. Women in the status quo never have any choices whatsoever, because what they being imposed to the choices is only one, that is you must opt in into a relationship and eventually getting married. And this is why we stand on opening government. We say as feminists, what we should prioritize is encouraging women to stay single. We think that the relationship that we need to talk about, that is the relationship that at the end of the day will often eventually goes to marriage, right? We say that women in the status quo is an ideal to marriage on how, where they are actually want to go to marriage, it's actually something that hamper their handling on their career, for example, because they're being imposed and told to stay at home. This debate is not talking only, it's not talking about a liberal country or super conservative country, because those kind of things will not eventually try to change anything. This debate occurs in a bell curve where there's country that is feminist, for example, but the movement for this kind of woman is still limited at the end of the day. A bit of mechanism what we mean by encouraging. We say that it's the status quo relationship is not ideal. We say that we cannot see in a super ideal relationship where women can opt into something, but rather we need to see in the norm of the majority of the society that what kind of thing that is ideal inside of the marriage in the eye of the society. We say that if they want to talk about biological need like sex, for example, we say that it can still be accessible anyway without marriage. Masturbating, for example, or hookup culture, so on and so forth, it is not the debate. If they want to talk about having children, for example, we okay with women having children as long as women not opt in into marriage, for example, so on and so forth, but we highly encourage women to stay single. With that in mind, I have two ideas. First, why relationship is inherently directly complicit to structural patriarchy, and secondly, why it can create a better protection toward women. Before that, a bit of framing. What is the obligation of women and feminists in the status quo? We think that is to protect women from any microaggression that exists and also oppose everything that convoluted with patriarchy, right? Choice in the status quo is not a choice anyway. For feminists, is not actually promoting all choices for women to actually exist, but rather it's always been about objectively trying to measure what kind of choices that's actually okay for women to opt in. This is why feminists still oppose surrogate mother work, for example, that literally harm women, because it is something that will harm them eventually, so on and so forth. Meaning that this debate should measure which side can eventually try to engage to this kind of woman to choose what to actually quote unquote mengarahkan them to choices that is far more better. Firstly, why relationship is directly complicit to structural patriarchy. Marriage and relationship in the status quo always been seen as a way of life for everyone, right? This is why feminists need to come in as a counter narrative toward this, right? By not letting women to opt into marriage. Why? Relationship has a tons of implicit but controlling rule that is actually imposed by the norm of society. For example, women, if already married, they must stay at home, where women, if they continue to actually go to this kind of job, for example, and not actually stay at home and be housewife, for example, it being stigmatized by the whole neighborhood as, oh yeah, if you actually still go to this kind of job, who will clean your house, who will actually serve your husband, for example, if you actually still working, for example, so on and so forth. The choices that exist in their world to opt in into marriage in and of itself is something that's also limiting the choices that women can opt into. It must succumb to the existence of marriage rather than have other choices to opt in, like go to job, for example, so on and so forth. This is also seen in where women in the young age, for example, being told, oh yeah, you need to learn cooking and cleaning houses, for example, because in the future you must serve to your husband. The choices that exist in their world is the choices that always been occurs to told them to go on marriage, so on and so forth. This is why in the status quo we see that every neighborhood, every mother and father whatsoever taught their daughter, for example, to just continue cooking, for example, because at the end of the day it is something that they need to focus on, so on and so forth. Even inside of relationship in and of itself, it is an undignifying choices for women to actually opt in. Why? In a relationship where you will with a man, for example, so on and so forth, if the man cheating, for example, or you end up in a breakup or divorces whatsoever, what will likely to happen is that society eventually will blame you as a failed woman, for example, because the norm of the society not saying that, oh, maybe the man is a jerk because he actually cheating from you, but rather they will say, oh yeah, maybe you are not actually serving your man enough, for example. That's why they actually break up for you and going to divorce, for example, because you are not serving them at house because he is very tired, for example, so on and so forth. At the end of the day, up from this kind of relationship or those kind of thing, even inside of relationship in and of itself, is something that is undignifying because you are the one that will be blamed anyway. Even when this kind of woman want to actually go to court, for example, to sue for this divorce and child custody, for example, man is the one that is actually work because on how the norm exists, right? Meaning that the one that eventually can able to pay this kind of good lawyer is just the man, not the woman, right? Woman will only accommodate public lawyer that's simply shit, right? Meaning that it is very likely for women to to lose anyway in child custody law, for example, or even in this kind of divorces, women are very unlikely to opt into this, because what will happen is a stigma toward this kind of woman that, oh, if you divorce, that you are the one that's fault, cannot handle your man, for example, so on and so forth. But why instead of this kind of barriers and relationship in and of itself is something that is actually very disruptive? This leads into my second idea about protection toward women. Inside of marriage, there's a tons of abuse that being normalized by society. What does it look like? Domestic, physical, or mental abuse that is already tons of cases, like tons of domestic rape occurs, for example, or tons of cases in India where there's a lot of domestic abuse, like the husband hitting their wife, for example, so on and so forth. But the problem with it is that society see it as something that is normal. Everyone see it that domestic and mental and verbal abuse about like limitation of movement, that you must support your husband wherever you go, for example, or even where you want to continue career, for example, but your husband is actually opposing you to do so, you are actually being limited of your movement. Meaning that this kind of mental, verbal or domestic physical abuse is something that is very likely and very common to happen. The problem with it is that society see it as normal, where, oh yeah, maybe the woman is not actually quote unquote serving their husband enough, therefore the husband is actually very angry, for example, or maybe the female is actually someone that is maybe actually attracting their bosses in job field, for example, therefore the man is actually opposing them to do so, right? Even inside of courts that is pretty much biased to this kind of woman, meaning that the protection and the justice that will be given to this kind of woman will not exist anyway, right? Because of public lawyer that's pretty much shit, and women that are able to go to work, therefore they will be the one that have this kind of money and have this kind of child custody, or even in terms of domestic abuse, a lot of women doesn't want to talk out because simply they will lose in the court anyway, right? The opposition will say women should come to marriage and be happy. It's just a bias, and it is a not real happiness. Why? Because what you see is only one choices. This woman might be happier if they opt in into job field, for example, but they are convoluted with this only one choices of woman must opt in into marriage, right? Meaning that the happiness in their world is something that is not actually true anyway. Why progress in opposition? It's really much worse, right? The choices that they want to actually hold is only choices that can actually fresh in liberal country, where woman in relationship are already seen as the same as a man, for example, and can opt in into other choices. But we say that the debate is on this kind of bell curve, where every woman is actually being convoluted and hypnotized. There's the only one chance for you after getting married, that is cannot opt out into other thing that exists, like going to job or other thing. This is why we think staying single, meaning you won't have to this kind of convoluted and choices, and have chance to opt into other thing that pretty much better. We're very proud to propose.
Thank you for the speech. Sekarang LO.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, wait. I think that both sides agree that as feminists, you should be, promoting the choices of a woman, that all of the choices are very valid in the first place. Exactly when they say that this context, the context of the debate happened in a not so liberal country, like for example, the country that is still, succumb into the is still not yet progressive about the idea of feminism and whatsoever. I think that this is important to notice that being a feminist doesn't necessarily mean that you have to opt into radical feminists that oppose the idea of marriage and whatsoever is that. Because notice that feminists in current status quo is have a very spectrum in the first place. So I don't think that the moment when they put this context in for example, like developing country like Indonesia, for example, I don't think that it is justified to impose a norm that getting married is something that is wrong and whatsoever, because at the end of the day, they are the one who is going to disenfranchise women. So how opening opposition will set this debate? Number one, we are going to accept the choices of the woman to marry the one that they love in the first place, and we are not going to, secondly, we are not going to condemn the choices that they have, but lastly, we are still going to compare and educate both men and women how marriage life should look like, and we're also going to keep advocating the idea, the law that's supposed to protect women and whatsoever. Is that right? So that's why I don't think that there is an urgency for us to encourage women to stay single in the first place, right? So that's why I'm going to prove two things in my speech. Number one, the justification on why this is not within the interest of the feminists to promote the idea of staying single, and secondly, how the discourse of and the movement is going to be better under our side, all better will be interpreted in my speech. Look, first thing first, what is the interest of the feminist movement, especially in this in this not so progressive context in the first place? I think that the moment when this kind of feminist exists in this kind of context, I think that the idea of feminist is to validate the choice of the woman in the first place. Why their choices is important in the first place. I think that those kind of people, their choice, this kind of woman choices is valid because now the context of the context is very much different with their previous generation. Look, the moment when they choose to get married, most likely this kind of woman choose the one that she loves in the first place, the one that she already have sex, for example. That's why I think that this is important, because the moment when we let this woman to get married with the one she loves, for example, it shows to you that women also have the control over their body, for example. It is different with the previous generation, whom their marriage is very dictated with their family and whatever is that, right? So that's why I think that the context is already shifted in the first place. But moreover, I think that even if this kind of marriage is, I think that even if they get married, I think that there is still already some degree of protection coming from the government to prevent them from being exploited. For example, like there is a program of keluarga berencana, for example. It is a symbol that protect women from being used as a production, being used as a tool to produce children and whatever is that, right? But moreover, it shows to you that being the existence of this program in this kind of context, it shows to you that the government also willing to protect this kind of woman in the marriage in the first place itself, right? So that's why I think that this kind of choices is valid in the first place. But why validating their choices is important? Because the moment when you encourage women to stay single, I think that this can as feminists, we are going to dictate them into something that they don't actually like, right? So that's why this kind of woman is less likely going to appreciate their choices, and they are feel inferior towards other women and so on and so forth, right? So that's why I think that this is important, because being in the context of non so progressive society, I think that we are also we should also respect the women who also want to embrace traditional value like being housewife and whatsoever is that, right? So that's why this is important, because even if they go into traditional value, I think that there is already protection coming from the government itself. But sure, if the government say that the protection is not enough, I think that why our cases is matter, because the moment when you still support women from getting marriage, at least at the end of the day, the discussion of passing the law of RUU PKS or any law that support creates safer marriage is going to be much more is having much more degree of importance at the end of the day, right? So that's why more people will going to opt into this kind of discourse at the end of the day, right? But moreover, under our side, I think that the right of women is still going to be protected anyway, right? In the status quo, I think that women can also still pursue career. For example, the company also still willing to hire women who opt into marriage and whatsoever is that, right? So that's why I don't think that there is any problem in the first place. Secondly, I'm going to explain why the discourse is going to be better under our side. Look, what is actually the goal of feminists? It is to be inclusive and not trying to be hierarchical, meaning that we don't promote the idea that we should hate men, therefore we should exclude them from our life and whatsoever is that, right? So that's why I think that it is exclusive. The moment when we opt into marriage, I think that these women will also have the same bargaining position with men, because at least this kind of man who is probably bigoted, for example, is also still have the chance to be educated by this woman in the first place, because they are likely going to listen to their wife and so on and so forth, right? But moreover, I think that this is important, because you can in the current context, I think that the moment when you up into marriage, for example, you can still have discussion with your husband, for example. There is a role division within your family, so that's why woman is not oppressive, and so on and so forth. I think that they can also get happiness within the family itself because they think that this is their choice, right? The moment when they choose to cook, bekal for their husband, for example, they are more likely going to be happy at the end of the day because they think that their choices is something that is not regrettable at the end of the day, right? So that's why I think that this is important because at the end of the day, you are also going to have the same bargaining position with your husband and so on and so forth. So that's why I think that this is important. But lastly, I think that under their side, I think that this is going to worsening the polarization and discussion within the feminist itself. I think that inherently, feminist is already disunified in the first place. I think that the discussion of creating safer marriage, creating safer environment, mengesahkan RUU PKS or any kind of law that protects women is better under our side because at least women will appreciate the choices of other women and not trying to disenfranchise the choices of other women. So that's why there will be no unnecessary fighting between women and whatsoever. Is that right? So that's why I think that this is important because at least the movement is going to be much more organized and create more protection to women we back to oppose.
Halo, sorry for interrupt, tapi before we continue the debate, aku mau tanya concern dulu untuk semuanya, soalnya the whole debate bakal di-record, is that fine?
Uji is fine.
CG is fine.
Okay,
CO is fine.
Is fine.
so everyone is okay with that? Thank you very much, let's continue the debate.
Hi, am I audible?
Iya.
Okay. The choice of a woman to marry is being engineered by society and government that wants reproduction and wants children to make sure that the economy is running. The way that women are being treated in marriage, in the bell curve of the society, is unjustified. And before we have our norms, we are not going to succumb to the norms that are to the policies that are being made by men in government. In, like, for example, policy buildings and policy makings, right? Under my speech, I will talk about two things. Number one, I'm going to tell you step by step why women's power is asymmetrical. I'm going to, like, for example, explain the median. I'm not going to, like, for example, talk about worst case. I'm going to talk about, like, normal, why even in normal housewives or normal households, women's power is asymmetrical and it's unjustified. Secondly, I'm going to talk about, like, how to collectivize as a movement, and this is the way for us to collectivize as a movement. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the principle of feminism, why we cannot succumb to anything that are, supporting patriarchy, and that's the principle of us. Just one quick rebuttal towards opening organization. So basically, they said that this is policy is too radical and it doesn't fit, right? Two responses. Number one, this policy is not too radical because we think that right now, when we want to talk about Indonesia and etc., right, the feminist movements right now is there is progress. I'm not gonna say that there is no progress, but despite of all of the progress, the companies or the people who are responding are people who are smart. For example, multinational companies to actually make like maternal leave and etc. Yeah, that's sure. But there are still like thousands of other companies right there. Only, for example, grant maternal leave for only like freaking 14 days, like for example, these PT-PT nggak jelas, and like other things that are really asymmetrical towards women, right? So you need to talk about the majority of things, and there are millions of population that does not, like for example, million of corporations that does not adhere to this standard, right? We are like, even if we want to go radical does not necessarily means bad. This is the way for us to do, and I'm going to talk about like feminist movement in my third argument, right? Number one, I'm going to talk about how to collectivize as a movement, and how to collectivize as a movement. Okay, so basically government has the incentive for the people to actually have children, right? Because they need their economy to be reproductive. When their children is low, then they want to, for example, have people to actually have more children. This has been nudged by government. For example, even in Japan and Belgium, the way that their generation is stuck, they are actually, for example, giving nudges towards the people to actually ngewe and have anak, right? So we think that when I'm going to mechanize this, right? How then we will, for example, make policies under our side? We are going to, for example, encourage women to actually stay single, because we are going to tell them that in every step of the way that you are not being treated right, and it's asymmetrical, and not all corporations are, for example, friendly towards you when you become a housewife and when you become a wife. And we want to pass policies that, here's the policies. all companies, for example, needs to give maternal leave. All companies needs to have equal paying wage. For example, all families should have paternity leave, famine stamp, and things like this. Like these are the like for example, quotas in parliament, etc. needs to be really really good, right? These are the policies that we want to push in, and why this will work. Two things. Number one, if women, for example, are collectivizing this and unite, and for example, does not want to have, for example, children, most likely government will be, for example, there is a extra bargaining power and position from the women because the government are, for example, scared because they don't have like the next generation with them, right? So you have an extra bargaining power. But number two is that you also can, for example, unite with the women politicians, and you actually have like internal support under parliament in order for you to push this kind of policies at the end of the day, right? It won't work under opposition side because you are continuously succumbing towards the like world in which the women are being mistreated. I concede that progress are happening, but the progress is so slow is that we cannot face this every day in our lives. The progress is so slow that there are a lot of, for example, villages in Indonesia that forces women to be, for example, wives. Or there are a lot of, for example, even if the woman has a option to go to career, there are a lot of talks such as if you, oh yeah, for example, you can have a job, but if you want to marry, for example, does not if you want to marry, please like quit your job, for example. Or there are a lot of still things that are disincentivizing towards women in companies, for example. Like there are very small women CEO, therefore the company does not make women-friendly policies, for example, or protection for women, harassment in work, for example. These are the things that are really, really bad at the end of the day. So we think that we need to unite, weaponize this for us to actually push policies in order for the world to be ready for us to actually have a relationship. The world right now is not ready. It's really bad for us, right? Number two, I'm going to talk about, this is an extension of Hans' argument, right? The relationship in every level, why it's asymmetrical. Look, opposition argue about choices, predictable. I'm going to tell you why the choices is not, what are meaningful choices and what are the things that needs to be good in choices, right? In choices, the meaningful choice is that, for example, you are giving like 4 choice, and each of the choices are actually same as good as one as another, right? For example, you need to spread the narrative. For example, like being married is as good as being a wanita karir, for example. Like, so these are the things that needs to be equal. But number two is that the way that you achieve it needs to also be equal. For example, the way that you need to marry, the effort needs to be the same as you want to, for example, become the engineer, right? But right now, it's not the case because it's really easy for you to marry, but it's really hard for you to, for example, go to a corporations and go to universities where there are a lot of, for example, like very much structured sexism towards you. For example, like in college, it's really like hard for like in college in university to actually pick women leaders, for example, for them to excel their CV. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you, this actually happens in ITB. Or for example, there are a lot of this incentivization for companies even to actually hire women. Even in Indonesia, there still happens in, like, for example, the bell curve of the society, right? So in every step of the way, you are being presented with numerous obstacles. So that is not the same choice as, for example, for you to get married, in which for you to get married, your parents can sell their houses for them to actually get financial leverage, right? This actually means that the choice is not the same. You are being directed, and society has been engineered women to actually go to, for example, marriages and to actually have children at the end of the day. You, for example, talking to, if you want to declare on the street or in social media in the bell curve of society, and you say that I don't want to marry, most likely people will think you as crazy, right? We need to have a world in which that people think that it is actually a valid option, right? We're not there yet. That's why we need to push to that, right? So we think that is really important. But lastly, why this is why under opposition side this actually succumbs to patriarchy movement, patriarchal, right? So patriarchy is actually, for example, like men having higher power, men having, for example, higher bargaining power and higher pay, right? We think that if you are, like, for example, stay with the status quo and do demonstrations that are actually not working, when inside the parliament, the one who's making women votes, women bills are, for example, men, we think that we are continuously succumbing towards this, and we don't want that to happen. We are very proud to propose.
Thank you, DPM, DLO.
Check, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, cool, wait. I'm arranging my paper. I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, we think that it's so evil that opening government never explained to you, but why that a feminist group itself have a justifications to take the rights of women, for example, to actually not getting married, for instance, ladies and gentlemen. Why that because the encouragement that happened in their side will most likely result into the judgment toward those who are married, for example, but at the same time they're able to go to work, for example, at the same time they are able to manage their family well without being get a domestic abuse or even like able to dictate their man, ladies and gentlemen, because they are working, for example. There are thousands of scenarios that happen on the ground. If not it's black and white, there is actually women always go at home and it's just cooking, producing kids or whatever is that. It's very generalization. There is very wrong coming from the opening government to begin with. So we think that if you're going to prove to you about a symbol of independence or upon a woman, for example, we think that it's not mutually exclusive by having disencouragement women to get married to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. We think that it can go hand in hand in status quo. This is exactly why the opening oppositions with argumentation is very important, because in status quo, when you're trying to giving disencouragement women, encourage women to not getting married, it means that you are creating a more polarized feminist group, because basically like not all feminists agree with that, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that in current status quo, my LO already explained to you that the feminist progress is that yes, there's a progress, but it's basically they are divided into thousands of groups: radical feminists, liberal feminists, red feminists, or perhaps socialist feminists, or whatever is that, ladies and gentlemen. We need to, they are catering different issues. By having this, imposing these issues more on the ground, it means that you are unable to unite them. This is exactly what the identity of OO is very important. We're going to unite them by appreciating the choice coming from them, ladies and gentlemen. We think that appreciating the choice of every individual, regardless their background, will result into a better unity. I'm going to try to explain it later, ladies and gentlemen. So number one, I'm going to talk to you clarifications upon the classes, upon the justification first, but second of all, is about how the ideas of the domestic abuse or whatever is that. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the unity of the movement, and lastly, about the dynamic of the relationship on the level of the principle first. Here's the thing. Opening government never explained to you upon how the justification to take the rights of women not to marry or not, ladies and gentlemen. Meaning that it's totally ignorance argument coming from GPM to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. They are talking about you the choice, the quality of choice that happens in status quo is bad. But we think that choice is very subjective. Perhaps that you are married, it's good for you, but it's not good for other people, for example. We think that we need the justification of choice cannot based on the quality of the choice to begin with, but it's about how the amount of choices, the larger amount of choices that given to you, for example. This is exactly why the principle on choices is invalid to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Number one, I'm going to try to explain to you. For far too long, women have been oppressed with less choices. For example, they're unable to go to work, unable to go into education, unable even to go to vote at the very older age, for example. And status quo, they have a choice, ladies and gentlemen, to do whatever they want. It means that when you're trying to imposing this limited choice in status quo, it means that it will jeopardizing the existence of a feminist that is actually accommodating the choice that is given to women, for example. So I think that is basically, it's very important for you to actually giving a larger amount of choice, ladies and gentlemen. We think that because the essence of feminists never been rebutted by the opening government. The essence of feminists, like in our side, is that appreciating the maximum amount of choice. I mean, like the what kind of path of living that they choose to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. So many, it's really the justifications goes to our side, ladies and gentlemen. Now, but secondly, they're talking about the conditions of the constitutional or whatever constitutional norm or what that is choice is being engineered by society or whatever is that. No, it's not true, ladies and gentlemen. It's very dismissive that in status quo, there are a lot of law that is basically accommodating, for example, like, like KDRT or whatever is that. In Indonesia, even if we haven't have RUU PKS, for instance, but we have KDRT RU for KDRT that is being legislated and that is being already applied, for instance, ladies and gentlemen. But it's not true, ladies and gentlemen. But in our side, so we think the problem about the social engineering that is manipulate the choice is not valid to begin with, because status quo women can do everything they want, ladies and gentlemen. But even if that is true, ladies and gentlemen, we think that a lot of alternative that I'm going to try to, we think that a lot of alternative that they could do to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm going to try to explain to you later in my cases about how the idea of the domestic abuse to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. We think that domestic abuse cases is that how they're arguing that it's not good because basically they could not go in court or whatever is that, ladies and gentlemen. We think that it's not true because in status quo, the court is not that succumb, ladies and gentlemen. In Indonesia, for instance, you can't report your husband just because of doing domestic violence. But even if it's not enough, I'm going to try to explain to you that there are a lot of alternatives. Number one, community able to provide you closure are very much, ladies and gentlemen. Even in status quo, you can have lawyers coming from the Komnas Perempuan, LBH, or maybe thousands of NGO, ladies and gentlemen, or perhaps a community of feminism that could give you a solution upon how handling your man or whatever is that, ladies and gentlemen. So we think in status quo, it's mitigatable to begin with. But the harm that is not mitigatable is that ruining the whole movement that exists in status quo. I'm going to try to explain it to begin with. Like what I've told before, in status quo, the unity of the feminist movement is so fragile that even we could not pass the legislation of RUU PKS because there are a lot of thousands of women that oppose the stance of feminists. Status quo feminists are seen as that radical. I mean, like that that you know not appreciating the other choice of women, for example, exactly because you are forcing the narrative that they are not related with, for example. But by the time that you are imposing this kind of narrative, the impact's exactly very worse, ladies and gentlemen. Because number one, you're getting a criticism coming from both women, for example, that choose to go marry, for example, but they're also able to go for a work, for example, even they are not able to go for work. Their choices is being a household, because it's okay to begin with. But second, you will also not get the support coming from a man, for example, that is already progressive, for example, that they are also become the victim of toxic masculinity, but they are feminists, ladies and gentlemen. You will not get this support because basically, like, when you discourage women, you will have less support for them, ladies and gentlemen. So I think that it's very bad. Uniting of the movement itself is very important to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. And that's because it could, when you have unity of the feminists, you could actually voice out the same voice without having rough discussions inside of the group to begin with, ladies and gentlemen. Even in status quo, the dynamic of the relationship that they never talk about is in our side will be much more better because my LO have told to you that they have an equal bargaining positions, like you can dictate your husband not having sex, or when you are working, for example, not giving money toward your husband, or whatever is that. So even in scenario that the world is not that progressive, we think that it's better for us because the unity of the movement is the source of the feminists to create progress. So very proud to you to open the case of the opposition.
Thank you, DLO. Now, call upon member of government. Halo, CG.
Am I audible?
Yo.
Test, test. My voice is not cutting, right?
Enggak.
Okay. Let me arrange my paper. Sorry. Okay. I'm going to explain why this is within the interest of feminist movement to stay single, and second, I'm going to explain the downside of having the relationship, and third, why we can better feminist movement in our side of the house. But three important framing towards opening government. First, I just cannot believe that they talk in very worst case patriarchal scenarios of marriage only like becoming the quote unquote relationship. Notice that if they talk in really conservative setting, the power of feminist movement is very small anyway, right? It means that they could not change any of those scenarios and any of the social structure because the conservative power is too strong. Their benefit wouldn't apply at all. But the second thing is when you talk about mental abuse, physical abuse, dude, it's a crime. Like we have criminal justice system, we have prosecution, and if in India, we cannot prosecute this. It means that your feminist movement lobby to anti-sexual harassment, a company changing is unlikely to happen. And third, because the idea of fighting patriarchy is really narrow in opening government. Because how if the relationship is between woman and woman? It is a lesbian relationship. There is no patriarchal value there. And how if the relationship is not about marriage, but it's also about serious dating and boyfriend and girlfriend relationship? I'm going to explain why this is still problematic in outside the house. So the conclusion is OG is too narrow. So just going to take the best case scenario, how if the relationship is not traditional and as not like conservative and constraining as marriage, and how if the relationship is not always about abuse and relatively progressive in our side of the house, why this is still bad and we still need to stay single. The first thing I'm going to explain is why there is a subtle coercion of women to engage in a romantic relationship to find meaning in their life. And to counterbalance, we require an encouragement to stay single to balance such narrative. Look, OO's argument about validating all women's choices and becoming inclusive can only fly if OO can prove to you that this choice is an informed and meaningful choice. Because if women take choices without considering the pros and cons of this relationship, the choice is meaningless. Unlike OG that talk about the social engineering of women want to engage in marriage because the government wants them to become baby making machine, like it's too extreme, again, conservative setting, right? But even if in progressive countries, which the debate should operate in, I think CO would agree with me, there is still narrative from traditional family structure, from parents, neighbors, father-in-law to expect you to have this family planning. And even the narrative that is created by novels, books, Hollywood, rom-com movies that put a narrative, that put a mindset that there is a goal of women that you should have your own Prince Charming, and otherwise that you cannot find it, you will not find a happy ending in your life. You're going to be an incomplete as woman. This narrative makes you feel like that. What does it conclude? It means that we require a counterbalance of the feminist movement to spark a conversation that there is the other side of romantic relationship. We're going to say that in journals, media portrayals, to say that sure it might be good, but you also might have like heartbreak in your life. You might give too much compromises. How if your partner is cheating on you? We're going to have this overwhelming amount of self-blame and second-guessing scenario, and this is going to be bad for you. We're going to have like more articles, more media, more movies, more journals, and more discussion on this. I think this is going to be good because this is within the interest of feminist movement. Because the interest of feminist movement is to unlock the opportunity and to provide choices for women as much as possible. We don't ban them to have romantic relationship, but when they eventually enter a romantic relationship, they already undergo such a substantive and comprehensive decision making within their hearts and minds to actually go this, so they wouldn't regret. But what is the benefit of this? The benefits, of course, like you will enter a more healthy relationship in the future, but you might be happier as a woman. But more than that, we are going to give emotional comfort to women that cannot find romantic meaning, for example, that feel disattached from romantic association because either they have traumatic experience in their life, or they have father issue, they have abandonment issue, or simply they want to find economic pursuit more instead of romantic relationship. I think this is important because we give them narrative that it's okay for you to not find romantic relationship because now we have more women do that, because now we normalize that in our Hollywood culture, for example. It means these women are less likely to have second guessing, to have what if scenario, and to have insecurity. They have more confidence in outside the house because society validates them. This is a benefit that is not as big as opening debate, because sure, talking about changing or OPKS, changing the corporate structure to give more wages towards women is a good benefit. But it is very unlikely because corporate structure, government, political party, society that still believe on the idea of patriarchal on the side of government, side of the house is an externality that you cannot control. The benefit is uncertain. Meanwhile, giving emotional comfort and normalization of their choice in our side of the house is a much more marginal benefit, but it's much certain, and it compasses more women in progressive country. Like having unity in opening opposition is also unlikely because women can still be splintered for any of those reasons, but giving them emotional comfort is the absolute objective that you need to have in our side of the house. So that's the most important benefit. But what is the downside of the relationship, right? Because, doesn't matter it's a romantic relationship in sense of marriage or dating, romantic relationship still requires an intense commitment between two consenting individuals to collectively have their resources, their money, their time, energy, focus to spend collectively to comfort each other. It still limits the choice of women to have agency in their life. First, let's talk about time, because you need to comfort your spouse in the hard days after they are tired, for example, after they have stories in their life, and you need to listen to them. You need to comfort them after this emotional day. But you have also your own problem, right? You need to also go to your friends, or you need to also for example, have your own quality time. But it's also limiting your choice in, for example, taking promotions in other city to have more wages, for example, or you need to take extra hours in jobs, but your partner, they don't try to ban you from doing this, but it makes you sad if you do this particular thing. It still limits your choices. We also talk about finances. More likely you will spend your money on down payment for houses, for wedding planning, for having expensive dinner, instead of spending your money on your own needs, like going out with friends to the bar or donating to the cause of charity of feminist movement. Your focus also going to be splintered because you need to take care of your spouses. Instead, when you are feminist, you want to, for example, organize a rally, organize demonstration. This is less likely to be conducted because even if you still go to rally in their side of the house, it's only the big rally. You cannot put detail on organization of such events that hamper your movement as feminist movement. And the possibility of heartbreak also makes you have self-blame, the guilt that you have, and you become more dependent towards your future girlfriend or future boyfriend because you don't want to have the same heartbreak. Your choice increasingly limited, even if in the very progressive scenario, very proud to propose.
Thank you, member of government. Kalau pun member of opposition. Nih, Ayam.
Hello, am I audible?
You.
Hello?
Yeah, audible.
Let me set my timer for a minute. We'll start my debate in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think opening opposition gives us a good explanation of why we should bring unity in feminist movement, right? But they don't necessarily explain why. We will need to feel that why it's the unity is very important because there is a precedence in the past, right? Because there is a precedence that we need to make sure that everybody's are able to unite in one movement, for example, and not telling us what happens if they don't also not telling us what happens if we are disunite, for example, we will tell you also. And second, after that, we also will give you a providers. Why? Furthermore, we need to create safe house for this kind of people who are marriage but not necessarily being secluded from what happens in opening in a government bench. We'll have also clarification to opening government. The whole argument of the opening government is that now that cooperation is that abusive. They don't really want to accept people. Husband is that is very abusive, right? It's it's not going to be happen that way. It's too extreme, because in the end of the day, if this kind of world is like that, then there is no husband, or there is no corporation who would like to have women anyway in the end of the day, right? Here. And things that, and second, if there is a factor, like for example, it's like there is a logic mistake in there. Like if it's really oppressive, like for example, there is marital rape, for example, we need to discuss about marital rape, not to just change it and shifting into like discourage marriage, which is equal to condemn marriage, because it's going to be the narratives that are being sensed, right? If you are using that logic, it means that you are all having the logic fallacy. Even if government, even if government would like to do kind of role, it's going to create only blame game, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because that when peoples are, when feminists look at people who are the victims of marital rape, for example, or they're being divorced, they're just going to blame them. Why? Because they're saying that no, it is because you're married, because you should just stay single, for example. I would not accept any OPPR. And it is very dangerous, because this person is have no alternative other than that. They're going to just opt into a patriarchy, because in the end of the day, they still want to accept them, right? Let's move on into closing government, right? Closing governments. They're saying that feminists are unable to have that kind of affirmations about like pro and con of marriage, because if you want to have this kind of discussion, what things that we need to bring is very things like why there is minimum there is a good relationship in the end of the day. The features of CG is like relationship is inconclusive and backlashing logic, because in the end of the day what being gone in their side is why single is good, right? The journal is going to talk about single, not talk about the relationship. And second, if there is still journal, what they're going to read is journal from like Islam, for example, from what available in this kind of world. That in our side of the house, we're going to provide you like a journal about marital rape and so on so stuff that is helping people on how facing solutions, right? It's going to be more subtle of message, and it's going to be the progress, even though it's going to slow, but it's going to fast anyway. It's going to be there anyway, comparatively to inconclusive government. So what we want in the opening, in the closing of position, right? We would like feminism to be flexible as a movement, because a movement we should able to move, and that is. We don't want to stagnate, or we want to digress, right? As individuals, you're free to choose whether or not you want to be abstinent, or you want to marriage, or you just want open relationship. It's okay. Even though in the end of the day there's marriage, we also okay, right? First, let's go to my first argument. What is important as a feminist to create movement that's open for everyone? First, feminists must still need support in status quo right now. They cannot demonize people, because we need that kind of support. We need donation. We need voice. We need people to go to ballot and choose feminist feminist woman to reach policy to reform the status quo. First problem, we should dominize and glorify staying single is set precedence that other woman, that woman who is single is the one who's ideal woman, right? It is going to be dangerous, because other women will be demonized. The one who are going marriage is going to be demonized. Like what will happen, right? I think that what we need to do when using that kind of attack, we're going to campaign. Propaganda is the ideal of woman. In like single woman is the ideal woman. To fly this, you need to dilute and sift the things that other issues, like for example, motherhood or other things. It's very important to go away, because you need to make sure you focus to creating narrative, because it's very hard to create this narrative, right? And if there is a woman who's still single, there is going to be anyway, right? This is going to directly clash as well with the that in the end of the day, they're not the vulnerable actors, because they are the one who are not necessarily being trapped into patriarchy directly. For example, they are necessarily in talk, for example, right? So exactly, they still exist anyway, and they are okay to be left alone. Like, but how we are going to make sure that the feminist political can be opt-in into parliament, right, and make an impact? We cannot create a segregations of community voice, because in gray area, people are still supporting us right now. People who are like Muslim, for example, who's really feminist, but not necessarily have belief that marriage is very important. You're going to attack them directly, and exactly this is going to be dangerous. What will happen is when you support feminists, right? You're going to lose support, like, because in our side, we're going to gather support. We're going to have a lot of support. We're going to have varieties of things. We even have journals on so stuff, and we're going to have advocacy. In your side of the house, is going to be opposite happen. Like what will we lost them. We lost our, if we don't do that, we lost them. We lost our momentum. Our job to movement, to cult move, is going to be lost, and we're going to fail as movement, right? Even if the marriage, okay, I would like to also engage, like our extension. Even if the marriage is imbalanced, first we would like to say that it is not imbalanced, right? We deny that the marriage itself in status quo right now is already the progressive. Women already have jobs, for example. Women already have education. Women have pursue some educations, and there's agreements of premarital, and it's going to be fair. And second, even if there is imbalances, we need to make this as our tool as well to fight patriarchy, right? We would like to reclaim this and becoming reappropriations, because in our side of the house, feminists is already using reappropriations for a very long time. For example, slut or bitches, for example, to become something very powerful to make sure that all people who are trapped in patriarchy are still able to opt into us, right? It is the same logic on how and word itself is being used by black community to make sure that BLM itself is that big right now, right? Exactly, it's not going to hamper our and it's going to create a narrative and symbolism that we are no longer afraid with people like with the slave master, which is the white people, right? We're going to twist the narrative, right? Even if it look like the movement, like there is still a toxic relationship. First, we're going to idolize great motherhood, for example, good wife. There is going to show that we are no longer ashamed on that. We would like to show that we would like to empower this kind of woman because the woman is our sister. Even if it's like that, like woman, I can like, you're already facing because of we need this kind of people because it's going to send that women are unable, a woman are now is not afraid to fight. For example, the outcome is we're going to make ideal movement, right? We're going to create policy and super policy because people finally can opt in and can choose them, and exactly of that we're going to shift the narrative right now and creating a new world, right? And second, problem inside of marriage is super complex. Discussion is not only just because you no longer marriage is going to be done, right? There is a lot of problem. For example, is unification of family, wealth divide. It's very hard. The output stuff is that you still need somebody, for example, and it's very harmful for this person. Divorce is millions of dollars. It's very dangerous. What is the outcome of this, right? That our outcome is that we're going to make sure that you are going to have a better movement that being able to close to help everyone. As a feminist myself, we are more than proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, member of opposition. Nah, call upon government whip.
Krishna, cek WA.
Check. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, set it up. The timer. Okay. Do not believe in opposition framing, saying the actor that closing government want to protect isn't vulnerable. The one that is vulnerable, women that are trapped inside marriage. For response, number one, listen, you need to know the likelihood. Women that are the choose to enter marriage is the one that probably conservative one. Probably they are the religious women, for example. So at least they are feel fine when they have some sort of limitation because they believe that is the message of God. But second response, the government want to protect is that women that do not want to marry, but they are forced by people to do marriage, for example. And this individual has no alternative because otherwise they will get a lot of condemnation. So the one that's vulnerable, exactly the actor including government. Third response, the logic of them is so problematic. Basically, they just sacrifice women because they say, oh, marriage is problematic, so let women enter marriage and fix it by their own. Meanwhile, their likelihood of changes is unlikely, for example. Therefore, this point is problematic. Fourth response, they also forget what is the consequences of that because changes is uncertain, but what is certain in problematic marriage is harms. What is certain, exactly traumatic feeling because you do not feel that's you inside of marriage. This thing need to be done by closing opposition. They need to answer, what if changes is uncertain, but traumatic feeling is certain, why then there is perfect trade-off to be taken. The best defense they say is that, oh, we want to create journal, for example. You need to put on this. How much people that read journals that is very exclusive and labeled by feminists. Otherwise, it is not convincing. Debate. The entire case about opening opposition basically about choice validity. It is clear that encouraging doesn't mean forcing them. When we encourage them to career, doesn't mean we degrade and mock discriminating women that choose to become housewife. Why this clarification is so powerful in closing government? 3 consequences. 1, it means that opening opposition cannot just bringing up the argument about choice validity to women, but they need to explain deeper why when you engage to marriage, that is intrinsic benefit that feminist movement can have, that they never answer that. But second, the most confusing part in opening opposition is about unifying the entire feminist when you make them have options to enter marriage. This argument requires an answer. Why option to marry is the common denominator of all fragment of feminists, considering the fact that the feminist fragment is that diverse, opening opposition need to answer that. Thirdly,
On that point,
at best, their output about option to marriage is about, oh, we can gather ally from progressive male that become the victim of toxic masculinity. 2 response. 1, when this male is that progressive, then this male do not have problem when we do not want to marry him, for example. So it is not urgent. But second of all, progressive male as ally still exists regardless including government. Because ally contract doesn't require marriage contract first. I am as progressive male. I am vote for feminist, but I don't need to marry the whole member of feminists first before I can become ally of them. So let's distinct ourselves with opening government, just to make sure you understand where closing government will start. Number 1, unlike opening government when they play in a condition where all feminist women trapped in a very patriarchal and extreme marriage, meanwhile, our argument talk in a scenario, even if your marriage is that ideal and that healthy, it's still fine. So, why closing government above opening government? 2 reasons. 1, because opening government forget the fact that we are feminist movement. It is very unlikely for us to marry someone patriarchal, for example. But B, because opening government stand in a very worst case about domestic violence, meanwhile we agree with opposition about domestic abuse is the enemy of everyone. So it is not that urgent. So what is the contribution in closing government? The first contribution, we told you that the way very specific and the intrinsic feature of marriage, irrespective the scenario, irrespective what type of husband do you have. When you having marriage, 1, you are focused to learn about compromises of your interest for ensuring that your marriage will remain healthy. These compromises is a form of limited expression that's become contrast of feminist agenda about women expression. But second, having marriage requires you to have discussion, requires you to have comforting your husband. It means you allocate your limited time as career women to comfort your partner. What is the impact? It's hard for you to participate in local and small campaign of feminist movement because you rather consume that time to comfort your husband, and you maybe only focus into big celebrations of feminist movement and forgetting about the local and small one. Lastly, your allocations of money also decreasing because you spend it for vacation to your husband, for example. Why then this contribution alone in closing government is that important in the debate? 2 reasons. 1, it means closing government is the one that talk in the perspective of opposition teams at their best. Even if your marriage is that healthy, closing government able to prove that there is still intrinsic feature inside marriage that is very harmful. But second, it means only closing government is the one that brings the most tangible and the certain thing to feminist movement. Take a look in opening opposition, the explanation about women's choice of and validity. Meanwhile, there is some certain spectrum of women that feel this is fine, therefore their argument is uncertain. How about opening government? It is about changing the whole company structure. It is about changing the political system. It is also contingent to something that's very uncertain that we cannot control as feminist movement. In closing government, our benefit is the most direct and the certain one. When we talk about time allocation, you can participate in a local campaign and that alone is a benefit. Your money do not need to be divided into your vacation holiday plan with your husband, but you can help the poor women that exist in your community, for example. You can give time to comfort the most unprivileged women inside of your community in the feminist movement. Maybe we talk about African American poor women, for example, that they are ETs, for example. We can allocate our time to protect this a very unprivileged individual. But when you let everyone to do marriage,
these unprivileged do not have another safe space. For example, this thing that is very important considering the fact that we play in the perspective of feminist movement. Because all of this reason, closing government deserve to go to grand finals. Thank you.
Thank you, government web. Kalau pon opposition web.
Check, am I audible?
Yup.
Okay, hold on, let me set the timer in my paper. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Bismillah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I'm going to start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. I have several issues to be talked in this debate. All clarification and the rebuttal will be intertwined on what's my points of issue. First issues, let's go towards the first, like the closing government. First, on the idea of how then in their side of the house, they would like to champion the idea of to balance out the discussion area of it. I think what and also whole government bench wanted to champion in this debate is that about the idea of the discussion as to why then in status quo people do not get full information about marriage and so on and so far, right? I think that detaching feminist movement from opting into journals and movies about how to balance out marriage is not necessarily a good solution to make women understand about pros and cons about marriage in and of itself. If you decide that feminist movement will eventually supporting single women, then all the journals that you are going to write is going to idolize the presence of the, the presence of a single woman and also showing all bad information about marriage in and of itself. Those particular information must be fly on side of the government side of the house because advocating an issue, making a propaganda is pretty much expensive. So those things are pretty much mutually exclusive to begin with. But the comparison in our side of the house is that particularly we want to provide and acknowledge all the choices of women. So what will happen in our side of the house, the moment when we do not try to demonize marriages, in our side we can also give education about how to balance in marriage in and of itself, to things like giving education about what is marital rape, what is the right of women, what is motherhood, and also the process and family is a part of a responsibility and so on and so forth. Those particular things is that what feminists can do in status quo by building journals, by also cooperating with government in pre-marriage classes, for example, that through government programs and so on and so forth. But those particular things need to co-op with the married women and also motherhood feminists for full information about the pros and cons about marriage in it or even relationship in and of itself. If you just stay single, for example, then you don't get full information, then there is no such difference about you becoming an anathema towards religion and also tradition in and of itself. Number two, what is the alternative of that? When women who want to located in a gray area, for example, and becoming conservative who still wanted to marry, what kind of journals or even knowledge marriage in which she wants to seek? They will seek into religious houses. They will seek into things like recital of hadith or even Quran. There is, in a pretty much conservative interpretation because there is no feminist movement there because basically feminist movement try to demonize it. Ladies and gentlemen, right? To this particular extent, the references of married rights and also becoming motherhood will all of them coming from the third party of religious conservative because there is no such alternative in their side. But here's the thing, a little bit clarification. In our side of the house, in their side of the house, if they wanted to focus towards progressive women, then there is no problem. Progressive women will still going to be progressive in a sense. But those who are vulnerable, those who are located in gray area, are also a little bit conservative because these are the part of women who do not have any when they wanted to become progress, for example, but also wanted to stick in the presence of religion and culture to begin with, because they see it like both things should not be mutually exclusive in any senses. Number three, let's talk about the, okay, so those are the first response, right? Second points of issue that I want to talk about is that, look, inside of government bench, they told to us that the presence of marriage is certainly abusive entirely, right? Number one, I think that what closing government have brought in this debate, like certain abuse, like mental abuse or even physical abuse, is literal crime to this extent. What they need to engage in this kind of cases is that irrespective of what this marriage or relationship looks like, it is inherently abusive towards feminists in general, right? But here's the thing, and they wanted to say, like inherent characteristic of marriage or relationship is about servitude, then another option in life is also about servitude. You are going to job is also part of servitude. Like you need to compromise some kind of your time and also signing the contracts upon how then corporation would take away 12 hours of your life and also we give them money as a form of compensation to begin with. Then why then marriage is suddenly different with those idea of servitude and so on and so forth? If you wanted to oppose the idea of servitude, then you need to acknowledge and having a burden. Why then? Socialism is the best interest of feminist movement, right? Instead of family, you still get like maybe we sacrifice money, we sacrifice our time, but there is an inherent compensation of looking towards your children, looking towards your husband every night that makes you happy in the entirety of the world, right? Second thing to clarify on CG is that they told us right now you will waste any kind of particular resources because you go to vacation, you don't get to donate and so on and so forth. The question is that why then when you are not married, you will automatically allocate and donate your money into the local feminist right, for example. It is pretty much ambiguous that there is no link of extension to explain as to why they would most likely to automatically donate and also having local contribution. And last but not least, the idea of domestic abuse. We think that in particular domestic abuse, saying that certain domestic abuse happen is that we need to focus on what factor that creates domestic abuse or marital rape. Simply advocating for a single will eventually going to simplify the discussion as if you have broken family because you are marrying to someone. This particular very simplistic and also did not acknowledge the real grievances of women. What they must have told you is that marriage is a complex process. There is prenuptial agreement, there is nuptial agreement, there is a separation of wealth, unification of family, there is a children, and so on and so forth. Saying inside of discussion, by saying women who are getting abused in marriage, for example, saying that you should eventually going to be divorced is not particularly great because to this particular extent, you just simplify the discussion and say you should leave your family, you should leave your husband, and you should leave their home. Well, there is a specific background that you need to take, right? What kind of factors, for example, either it's psychology, psychiatry, we have those particular discussion, and the benefit is that those particular married women should not be feminists as a whole. Last but not least on the politics, how do we advocate feminist movement? One, at least in our side of the house, we include all individuals. At least in our side of the house, we are trying to reclaim that in the past, maybe if marriage and motherhood are becoming shameful to women, but right now we don't make it as shameful. Take a look at the reclamation of bitch and slut, right? Those individuals who didn't dress in a conservative manner in second wave feminists, they bring demonized. But third wave feminists, for example, they're trying to include those particular individuals. All of those things is to think for unity, and we think that in our side of the house, we will also unite in terms of vote, for example, and also to things like donation, because you feel like this particular situation, we include all types of women. We're very proud to cross our case.